Thank you for being here with me today. I'm really excited to have you all for this Women's History Month discussion. So I think we can just all start off by going around and introducing ourselves, and I can start. So I'm Cambria Lee. I am the Communications Associate for the ACLU of Pennsylvania, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. And how about we kick it off with Muniba, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can go around.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Cam, for moderating and doing this. My name is Muniba Talakter. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an immigrants' rights legal fellow. So I part of the legal team working on mostly immigrants' rights issues. And yeah, excited to be here with you all.
Thank you.
I can go next.
Yes, that'd be great. Thanks, Tiara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tiara Bradford, and I am our criminal justice policy advocate working on our Smart Justice campaign here in Allegheny County. And I work on issues in the western part of Pennsylvania. And my pronouns are she, her.
I guess that leaves me. I'm Andrea Anastasi. Very honored to be here today, especially with my wonderful colleagues. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the legal intake manager at the ACLU of Pennsylvania, which means that I am responsible for managing all of the intake that comes to our affiliate all over the state. Although I'm based in Philadelphia, on Lenape land, which I just want to give a shout out to the Lenape peoples. And I think that was all that was requested of us at this time. So.
All right, thank you all. And I don't think I said my pronouns, but she, her. Thank you all for being with us. I did want to start off with kind of like a little fun question before we get into some of the other questions I have for you. Is there, a women's rights issue that you really want to just like lift up for the month, like just anything personal that like a women's rights issue that really hits home for you?
I can go. So I want to say all of them. But I want to say that I think that it's really important that we have a month to commemorate and honor all of the contributions that women make to history, culture, and society. At the same time, I think the fact that we have a month out of 12 in the year for this indicates to me that for me personally, an issue that's near and dear to my heart, I think, is more adequate and accurate representation of women year-round. Because without that adequate and accurate representation in all levels of society, women can't engage fully as public participants in the systems and practices and policies that govern them.
I can go next. I think, what Andrea said really resonates. All of them is such a good answer, but, if I had to choose one, something that I think about often is like the policing of what women wear or can't wear. And that's something that impacts me on a day-to-day basis because I wear a hijab, but there are other things that I've seen, like, oh my God, since elementary school when we were told we couldn't wear short skirts in my school and like things like that, which it's just wild to me that, sorry for the background noise, but it's just wild to me that, my younger cousins are still being policed on what they wear. I had to get special permission to take the bar with my hijab on, and I didn't submit it on time. So I actually took like this is like something that I hate talking about because I got super emotional, but I had to take the bar without my hijab, and it's like, you know, there's so many hurdles for women to already jump through, but to like have to be policed about what you wear, it's like should not be happening ever, but especially not in 2021. So yeah, I didn't take the bar in 2021, but still, you know, still a young lawyer.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know. I feel like we should send them a letter and change that, definitely. And Tiara.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, Niba, OMG. Like, that is absolutely crazy. I'm sorry that that happened to you. And that we should do something about that. But so something that I was thinking about as a women's rights issue, actually this morning I was on Twitter and I saw a video of a woman talking about all the things that women go through after they give birth, and how that like can impact their body, like right after pregnancy, but like also for like years and years afterwards. And so it just made me think about how we don't take pregnancy that seriously. And I'm not pregnant or I don't have children, but still, like I'm thinking about the future, like in the next 2 years, that could be me. And also thinking about how women of color, specifically Black women, have like a higher mortality rate when it comes to giving birth, because doctors and physicians and stuff aren't taking them seriously when they're saying that they feel something happening to them or whatever may happen with pregnancy. And it's like we're supposed to be a first world country, and we're still having people who are dying from childbirth because physicians aren't taking them seriously. And so I think just like women in health is something that I think I wanted to uplift and highlight as something that we still have to work on today and something that's a major issue.
Yeah, that's definitely on like my brain too a lot. Just being like a Black woman, I feel like the age too that I'm like right around, like I just see so many people in my age range having children, and I think about that, and I'm like, it scares me to to even have to interact just in our healthcare system nowadays. But for me, I also think about like Serena Williams, and another topic that comes to mind is just how like women are always told, you know, like if we are emotional or like passionate, if we're passionate about something, we're told that we're like over emotional, but like a man can do the same thing. And it just makes me think about like Serena Williams when she's like on the court, and like when she was that one match where she was getting like penalized for everything. And I'm just like, that still happens in the workplace or just in life in general. Like if you show any sort of passion or competitiveness, you're told that you're like over emotional. Not really want that to change.
Speaking of Serena Williams, she also had problems when she was giving birth. Like she almost died. I forgot what the actual health issue was. And it just went to show that even if you're a woman with like a lot of money and like name recognition, it could still be you. Like I think her husband had to like speak up on her behalf or something. But yeah, that was even an issue for her. So this is, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's like a perfect segue into the first question that I have for you all. So in today's society, do you still find it difficult to be, you know, a professional woman? How do you think the fight for equity, equality, and respect differ today compared to a few decades ago? And anyone can jump in for this one.
I can go ahead and start. Sorry, I feel like I was just talking. But as far as being a professional woman, I think there's still, I don't know, there's still this, for me, I've been thinking about recently about femininity and how much of that I'm allowed to show like in professional settings and at work. And it's something that I have to go back and forth about with all the time, because there's a fear that if you're too feminine, then people won't respect you or treat you the way they should. And I think that's garbage. I think we should be able to act and present ourselves in any way, and we should be given respect, like regardless. So that's something that I'm always constantly thinking about, especially as like a young person who's still like getting to know herself and figure out who she is in the world in general. And as far as the second question, I think that there have been a lot of people who have come before us, fortunately, who have helped a lot with the work that we do today. And so I don't want to say necessarily what we work on now is like easier, but I think a foundation has definitely been laid by people who've come before us to like help us with the work that we do now.
I can jump in. In terms of how it impacts me, I just want to say I feel really lucky to work at a place where I feel most of the time I can be my authentic self, but it still does cross my mind. I mean, Muniba can see this the most clearly because we work in the same department. I, speak my mind often. But there are still situations, especially like after the fact, where I'm policing like my own, is what I said okay? Like, how did that land? But only would I be asking myself the same questions if I were not a woman? Or should I have asked that more as a question? So that's still present even for a modern woman. And I will also acknowledge that I am the white woman in this group, so I also have a degree of privilege there. In terms of overall, how has the fight for equity in the workplace changed? I think it's a really tricky thing because we see an explosion of women in the workforce. Like since the 1970s, I think the number of women in the workforce has more than doubled. But if you put that number aside and look at where are women in the workforce, are they in management positions? Are they in all of the fields? Are they in NASA? Are they secretaries? Are they teachers? Are they, where are they in the workforce pipeline? I think those numbers probably will reveal that we've kind of stagnated, as will the fact that we still make less than men. What is the current number? Is now we make 81 cents to their dollar. And this is with all of the work that our wonderful predecessors have done and the women that keep fighting like this fight head on are doing. These inequalities still exist. They look different, but they're still there. And I think they call for, not by us because we have so much work on our plates, but they do call for, maybe in some senses, I think I've become complacent when thinking about this issue. And I wonder to what extent other women are complacent in their thinking about it, and whether we need to re-examine all of it, because why has it stagnated for so many decades?
Yeah, and then when you look at those disparities, it's even worse for like women of color. Like when you talk about like the pay, the wage gap, I think for Black women, it's like 66 cents to the dollar. And then for Latin X women, it's like even lower than that.
Yeah, I think like one of the things like that I was thinking about, also Chem and Tiara, I think this goes to how Serena Williams like has to or is judged on this different in this completely different way than her male counterparts. I think one of the things like I think about often is like I like to really think before saying anything, and I think sometimes that comes off as like me not having like something substantive or like just being too meek, or that's how like I feel like some people read it, and that frustrates me. And it's like I think like if someone, a male attorney, were quieter, they would just be like, oh, that person's so serious and thoughtful, and whereas like it's like, oh, this person who's a woman, she probably doesn't have a backbone and doesn't belong in this field, and that, that some of it, like Andrea said, like you do a little bit of self-policing. You're like, okay, wait, no, I need to say something right now just to say it so I don't look like that person or be judged in that way. And I think like, you know, I doubt our like male counterparts in the legal department are ever thinking that. And that goes to my second point is I think mansplaining is such an issue in like all spaces, less so I would say internally, but I think, you know, I'm sure like folks just feel more comfortable to talk about an issue or feel like they're an authority on an issue when they're not, who often happen to be male identifying. So I think that's, you know, that's something that I know like I struggle with, and other folks that I've spoken to who identify as women struggle with, and like when to call that out or when to let it be. Like I know I was just thinking about like this email interaction where someone was like, oh, by the way, you should do this. And I was like, yep, yeah, I did do that. And that's like, you know, it's like how many times should you like call people out on their in their blind spots, and also just like, hey, that's not cool to do. And I think thinking about a few decades ago, Tiara, what you were saying is like a lot of really important foundation has been laid down. Like I know that I think it was like 2 years ago that I was telling one of my relatives who, honestly, I'm not sure how I'm related to. That's how it is in Desi families. But at a family reunion, I was talking to her, and she's also an attorney. And I was like, I feel so weird being the only person in the room that looks like me. And then she's like, it was worse before, because she's been practicing for quite some time now. And like, you know, she's still a young attorney, but I think she started working 10 years ago. I guess not a young attorney, but like she's a young person. So that's why I view her as a young attorney. But I think to me, it's like wild how some of the things that people grappled with 10 years ago are, you know, barely have shifted. And that's still something to think about. Like the legal field, like it is more diverse, but we still, you know, we still see legal departments that are like largely white, largely male. I'm not talking about like any specific one, but I can tell you like in certain, like, you know, in any like legal team meeting, I usually happen to be the only person of color, and sometimes it's the only woman, and it's like so strange still to be occupying space in that way, and to always thinking about how you are set apart from the rest of the group.
Yeah, and I think I was reading, I mean, the legal field in general is still predominantly male dominated. And then when you get down to like bringing in race into that, it's maybe like 15% when it comes to people of color. And then when it comes to women, I think it's around like 30-some%. But at the ACLU, our organization is predominantly women, so that's just like an interesting dynamic. Okay, so moving along, thank you all for those thoughtful answers. Historically, women of color have been the last to receive rights and access to many of the privileges that are afforded to white America. In the advocacy and legal work that we do at the ACLU, what are some areas in which you see women of color still being left behind?
I can start again. I feel like it's a pattern. Like
a circle.
But I will say, because I work on our criminal justice work, I think it's kind of difficult because a lot of the racial disparities in the criminal justice world are male-centered, because like men are incarcerated more than women in general, and some of the greatest disparities have to do with like Black men, right, being the most incarcerated or disproportionately incarcerated. However, like the effects of incarceration and over incarceration impact women just the same, and especially if you think about how women, we still tend to play more traditional roles, and like we are the ones who are child rearing and like keeping houses together. Like incarceration is going to significantly impact women because they do so much for their families, you know. And I think a lot of people, first of all, a lot of people forget in general that people who are incarcerated have families, like they have loved ones who care about them. But specifically for women, it's like these are mothers, these are caretakers who, you know, any one of us could be incarcerated for any certain reason. And so I think we need to start think about women when we're thinking about reentry and what people need when they're coming back into society, and when we're thinking about decarceration and locking people up pre-trial, and like, you know, someone can be locked up for 3 days and like lose their job and lose custody to their kids, what have you. So I think we definitely could do a better job of talking about women more when we're talking about the impacts of incarceration, especially since the rate of incarceration for women has like increased. Like it used to be, I don't have the numbers on me right now, but it's certainly increased over the past 20 years, especially for Black women being more and more incarcerated. So I think that's one of the issues where we could do a better job.
Thank you, Tiara. Yeah, women are the fastest growing population of people who are incarcerated. And I read something the other day, I forgot the name of the program that Obama created for Black men. And I think it was Kimberly Crenshaw, the person who conceived the idea of intersectionality and feminism, who came up with a parallel program for women. And there was some sort of byline about how Black men are like the drivers of reform, and then like Black women are left behind. So what you said just really, really, really rings true, and also made me think of the work of Harold and Gada, two of our colleagues at the ACLU of Pennsylvania that do a lot of work around the school to prison pipeline. I think that they worked with a group called Black Girls Equity Alliance that put out an astonishing report at the end of last year, was 2020. Yes, it was such a long year. But the report revealed that Black female students were referred to the criminal law system at 7 times the rate of white female students, or maybe it was 10 times, but as compared with Black male students to white boys, it was like 7 to 1. So the disproportionality was even worse when you were looking at Black girls. And then like, you know, so the precursor to like mass incarceration for a lot of people is the school to prison pipeline. So I would say another area where young Black women in particular are being left behind is in education, especially when we're talking about the school to prison pipeline. So thank you so much, Tiara, for lifting up mass incarceration, so I could lift up the school to prison pipeline.
And I'm just gonna hop on that train, Andrea, because I was thinking about how the supports that like folks who have children who have learning disabilities, and how that ends up being a lot of times, like I don't have specific statistics, but I worked with a lot of young Black girls and in my last job, and it's just it's really, really sad to see like learning disorders being passed off as behavioral issues, especially for Black women, because of just existing stereotypes and like things like, you know, disrespect and not listening to authority, like, is like the ultimate thing that folks or school administrators lean back on to, and it's certainly coded language, but it's upsetting because it's, you know, folks who don't have the support to navigate a system, like to navigate like a school system that's like setting them up for failure, but also like being in those advocacy meetings. Like, it's really hard to tell a school administrator, like, this is like, you can't be using that kind of language without like bringing race into it. But you know, that's the other issue, is like when you're doing advocacy on that kind of level, there's just so much resistance to talk about race when that's what's important in like spaces like that, because otherwise, like, you just see like a disproportionate amount of young Black girls and young women of color being suspended and not getting the school time they need, and not having their learning disorders diagnosed, because, you know, that's what like the administration just is incentivized to do. So
Yeah. So you all have been mentioning, you know, kind of the intersection of race and womanhood, and you know, we all have similar struggles, but it's clear that the more marginalized boxes you check off, your hurdles become more complex. So why is it important to continually acknowledge our intersectionalities in the movement for women's rights?
I can start and pull a tiara. But yeah, I think this is something that I've just, like, throughout my legal career and before that, think about so much, because especially in the context of doing like litigation, I think there is so much risk of doing more harm than good in pursuing outcomes and settlements when they're not informed by community members that you're working with. And one of the things that I think you really need to be thinking about in like pursuing litigation is you know, how complicated that issue becomes as you're thinking about those quote unquote boxes. And the more boxes that are checked, like it impacts like what kind of relief someone is looking for, or like, you know, me as a lawyer is thinking about. And this is like I'm gonna on the fly come up with a hypothetical, but let's say like we're settling a case and the win is getting the city to pay for like workforce readiness classes. I think, you know, like maybe some lawyers won't be thinking about like how access plays into that. And if like a workforce readiness class is only offered online, like you might be like, oh, that's great. Like, you know, folks can get on their computers, do this on their own time. But obviously that's not the case for a lot of folks who don't have internet access. And that's not something a white male lawyer necessarily is thinking about. It might not be something that I'm necessarily thinking about. And so it's just so important to be thinking about like all of the communities and individuals like impacted by a case you're working on. And the same goes for advocacy, right? And how things get complicated when, you know, gender, sexual orientation, or how you identify plays in, like all of those things can just really, really shift the way relief looks like for a person. And I think I struggle with that every day when I think about like the cases we're working on. And I know like our department as a whole tries to challenge each other and think about like, hey, you know, maybe this is not what we should be doing. Like, even though it looks like it's a solution or it could better something, like, is this where our resources are best serving communities? And that work requires, I think it like mandates us to be thinking about intersectionality and thinking about all those different boxes and how they complicate or, you know, ask us to do more or less in situations. And yeah, so I don't know. I think it's important.
Okay. Well, I can go next. I think I'm going to take like a little bit of a like broader approach from Maniba, but just thinking about intersectionality, like personally, I will say, one, whenever people used to ask me like if I was a feminist or whenever I thought about like feminism, I used to not say I was a feminist or really because I didn't feel like I was part of feminism. Also, when I used to think about how I identify, I would think, oh, you know, I'm Black before I'm a woman. And you all probably think like, what does that even mean? But I would think about like Black issues and walking through the world as a Black person more than I would as a woman. I think now I've definitely come to the place where I'm like, I'm both at the same time. And like, I can like think about both of those things as I'm walking through the world. But the point is that I think a lot of times Black women and other women of color can feel like the movement isn't necessarily thinking about them or catering to them, or when they're seeing different moves that are being made in the movement, kind of like what Maniba was saying, like it's not really addressing the issues that we prioritize or care about as a community. So I definitely think intersectionality is so important. And I recommend to you all who are watching out there to read Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis, because she really talks about the history of women's rights and like how, you know, white women were moving versus how Black women were moving, how white women were just trying to get out of this forever domesticated status versus, you know, Black women being seen as more masculine and being forced to do labor. And so basically not even being seen as women. And so overall, I think intersectionality is important because we're all starting from different places and we all have our different issues. And we are not going to get along, or we are not going to get very far like as women if we don't make sure we're uplifting like all women and bringing all women along and addressing all the issues, and not prioritizing other people's need to maybe already have privilege over others. So yeah, Angela Davis, Women, Race, and Class.
Thanks for that recommendation.
I agree with both of my colleagues. Intersectionality is there's no other way for me. You know, when Kimberly Crenshaw came up with that concept like 30 some years ago, before it became so ubiquitous, the case that inspired her was a case where I think it was 4 Black women wanted to sue, or they did sue General Motors because they couldn't get a job there. At that time, General Motors allowed women to work as secretaries and those types of jobs. But in practice, it only allowed white women to have those jobs. So in effect, Black women couldn't work at General Motors. And the court, in looking at the case, it looked at the issue of race and it looked at the issue of sex separately, like through 2 totally different lenses instead of combining the lenses. When you look at the race lens only, the court saw that you could have a Black male factory worker in the secretary pool. So the race claim out. And when it looked at the lens of sex without the lens of race, it saw, well, we have white women working in the secretary pool at General Motors, so sex discrimination out. So for me, it's just it's so obvious and fundamental that you can't address the effects of compound discrimination when you have a person who's like these four women in this case. They're Black women. They're Black and they're women. It's not either or. They can't just choose. Just like I identify as a woman, I also identify as a queer woman. But in order to have a full portrait of who I am, and all of my beautiful complexity, you need to see me as both. You can't see me as either or. And maybe a simpler, like non-legalese way of putting this is we have the visible spectrum, which has Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. If somebody asked me if I only wanted to look at the world through one of those lenses, let's say orange, I'd be like, no, that wouldn't make sense. I'd be giving up on all of these other colors. And no offense to Cam, I know you're partial to orange, but that just, I wouldn't have the full picture of all the things that I'm seeing right now. You know, and granted, I do want to acknowledge that there are people who do not have access to the full visible spectrum, but most people do. And if you can, then why would you give up any of those lenses and not have the complete picture that you can see before you, in order to embrace reality fully? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and when we're talking about, you know, looking at intersectionalities and being more inclusive in the movement, it just makes me think about this quote from Audre Lorde, who is a Black queer woman, and she famously said, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even if her shackles are very different from my own." And then hearing that quote just makes me think about, you know, like how Tiara is saying that, you know, she didn't identify with feminism, and even like it brings in the thought of, you know, trans women and how a lot of women want to kind of like push trans women out of the movement for women's rights, even though they belong in the movement for women's rights. So why is it important for us to be inclusive, especially of, you know, trans women and women of color in our fight for equity?
I can start. Honestly, it just, the situation, it hurts my heart because the rate at which trans women, especially trans women of color, like are dying every year is like, this is a huge, huge issue. And I just feel like as women, I don't understand why it's okay for us to neglect that this is happening or to turn a blind eye. Like, they are women. Like, my mind gets blown when there are women who are protective of womanhood and what it means to be a woman. And it's just like, being a woman is whatever you want it to be, first of all. And also, why are you gatekeeping womanhood? My mind is totally blown. Like, so anyway, I think we shouldn't be gatekeeping womanhood, obviously. And I totally agree with what Audre Lorde said. We are not all free until all women are free, and that includes trans women.
You know, I think just to really underscore it, the violence against trans women, especially trans women of color, it is not something that we can continue ignoring. And as and it needs, the work that we need to do to be inclusive has to be more than just like putting our pronouns in, which I'm not, you know, being dismissive of. Anything that I can do to make someone feel more seen and heard, I'm ready to do that. But I know that as a challenge to myself, I know that I need to be doing more for trans women, because this is like, you know, this is like an issue that it doesn't make any sense for anyone to have even a little bit of compassion and not be acting on. I think the idea, Tiara, that you were talking about gatekeeping womanhood, that is what, like, that's what any like terrible movement is doing, is gatekeeping and drawing lines and using otherness to just maintain power, because like, you know, you can gatekeep womanhood, but there's still going to be a hierarchy of someone who is more woman than you, and that's just simply a tool to keep folks like, you know, separated and not thinking about this as a movement. And you know, feminism has been really, really exclusive, especially in its earlier waves. And I know that, like, when I was younger and when I first started wearing hijab, like, my feminism was often challenged because folks, like white women, saw me as oppressed, and that's just like the category that I was in. So like I wasn't free enough to be a part of that movement. I of course view myself as a feminist and reject that notion, and you know, have found many spaces where I don't feel that way. And but yeah, I think like to anyone, and especially like folks whose lives are on the line, instead of finding ways to protect and shield those like trans women, like it's just unconscionable. That was such a legal word. I'm sorry that I said it.
I just echo everything that Tiara and Muniba said about gatekeeping. Trans women are women. Their rights are our rights. I'll just say on the topic of you know, no woman is free until every woman is free. If my freedom is conditioned upon the subjugation of another person, then I am not truly free. It's really just that simple. Especially, I think Muniba was highlighting that there's always going to be someone else who's more woman, but even more than that, these lines of separation are not real. They were imposed upon us by the patriarchy, by white supremacy, by these systems that we were born into. So to other someone, whether that's because they're trans or they're Black or they're wearing a hijab or they're queer or whatever the thing is just to buy into that system. Just because you have or I have certain perks in that system, and I, you know, can style my hair a certain way or wear the clothes that I want, or I don't know, whatever your idea of freedom is, I'm not really free so long as one of my sisters is suffering because she's in fear of her life because she's being murdered in egregious numbers, which is in fact legal or not unconscionable, Muniba. So I support your use of that word.
Yeah. And I just think about it in the way that, you know, we won't be able to really truly advance equality and our freedoms and liberties until we dismantle these notions of gender norms and identities entirely, and just allow people to be themselves and just experience everything on an even playing field. And I think that a lot of the work that, you know, so many like trans women are doing and like activists are doing is actually directly helping like the women's rights movement. So I don't see why so many people are like rejecting the idea of being inclusive and just bringing everyone into the fold. Like tearing apart these gender norms is helping all of us. And it makes me think too about like the work of, you know, of RBG. I just think about, you know, some of the cases that, you know, she took before the Supreme Court, that, you know, it looked at not only the roles of women, but the roles of men in our society. And like her case, Frontiero versus Richardson, And I wonder, what you all think. Is there still enough work being done across the board to erase traditional concepts and ideas of just like gender norms? And I believe in that case, only a woman could like get her husband's benefits, but the husband couldn't get the wife's benefits. So just like tearing down gender norms in general, is there like still enough work being done today in our society to do that?
The short answer is no. And that's just by virtue. And I'm not gonna. It's not my no is not a comment on the work that is currently being done. It's just a comment on the like how much work there is to do. So yeah, in that case, the woman was in the Air Force and she wanted to claim her husband as a dependent. But the rules are set up such that only wives could be claimed as dependents. And so then the question was, like, is this sex discrimination? And the Supreme Court of the United States said yes. And so it dismantled that. But that case was from, like, RBG, like, litigation days in the early 70s. And so it was only 50 years ago. And when I think about these major wins in the Supreme Court, I can't help but also think about Brown v. Board of Education, which was now like over 60. I went to law school because I'm bad with numbers, partially. But with Brown v. Board of Education, that was 1954. They ruled the schools had to desegregate. And in just May of 2016, so like 5-ish years ago, but 60 plus years after Brown v. Board of Education, a court had to order a school district in Mississippi to desegregate. So schools were desegregated by the Supreme Court of the United States over 60 years ago, yet we still have courts ordering schools to desegregate. And all of that is to say that Frontiera was 50 years ago. That's not a lot of time. Like these cases happen, but in terms of changing the culture, that takes way longer, especially because the dominant culture has been the dominant culture for so long. And so long as we continue to perpetuate gender norms and like ideas of what it means to be a woman or a man or a this or a that, these things are going to persist. And I think that we're seeing them, at least I'm really in an eye-opening way seeing them during this COVID-19 period where many women that I know who are also mothers have had to take on the lion's share of the caregiving at home while both she and the partner work from home. It's like they just defaulted to these traditional roles. I'll leave my commentary there, but and pass it off to my colleagues. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in this area.
Andrea, it's so funny because I actually was going to mention that, like the fact that especially in monogamous heteronormative relationships, like yes, women are being able to like work more and kind of do more and take more leadership roles, but then they're coming home and taking on the full responsibility of taking care of their homes. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And, that's more of a cultural thing and the work that we need to do as a society to like make sure that the work is being divided in a more fair way. I think that's something we need to work on culturally. But I will, as like a positive note, as far as things go, I will say it is nice. In a lot of roles I've taken in my like youngest career, it's great that I've been seeing a lot of like women in leadership roles and and working with a lot of women in the office. So I will say that that is a plus. But I think we have a lot of work to do as a society and culturally, and how I just feel like our society has not caught up to the fact that women are leaders, that women are running things. So yeah, I'll keep my comments there.
Yeah, and I'll I'll just add that I completely agree with Tiara about it being cultural, but just an example of how systemic and structural it is too, like thinking about like folks going through immigration proceedings. Men tend to get detained at, like, you know, in immigration, who are in immigration proceedings tend to be put in immigration detention a lot more, because immigration judges are like, oh, you know what, this is not the caretaker of the family. It's fine to keep them in immigration detention, whereas women, like, you know, might get a little more leniency and will not be put into detention, especially if they have children. And so you see like things like that, first of all, like end immigration detention and the carceral state. Like that's, you know, baseline thoughts, just throwing that out there. So you all know where I'm coming from. But I think like judges and the legal system being set up in a way where necessarily, you know, a caretaker dad being put into detention just because he's a man, like that continues to perpetuate how gender norms are like forced upon folks, even if that's not the natural set or the setup in their homes. And even if that's not the case, like that the woman is the caretaker, like that's just an assumption being made all the time in the legal space. And of course, I'm sure in so many other spaces. But I think, you know, Andrea, what you were saying about like how it hasn't been long since that case, and or it has been, but not in the way that our society moves. And you see that in the built-in structures of how men and women are perceived. And that's just one example, right, that I can think of, because I do a lot of immigrants' rights work, and my clients end up being men, who are like, a lot of the folks that we end up representing are men in detention, and that's not an accident.
Thank you for sharing that, and talking a little bit about some of the work that we do. And that kind of just makes me think about some comments earlier that Tiara made about, you know, our campaign for smart justice work. And I feel like, you know, a lot of our women's rights work is like intersecting with these other areas, like criminal justice reform. We do a lot of work with incarcerated women, especially we've been doing a lot around like COVID and improving conditions and trying to get people released from the prisons and jails. And we've done some work too around like trans women in prison, which can be horrible because sometimes they will put, you know, a trans woman in jail with men, and that can just prove to be horrific and violent. And we've had cases in the past that kind of covered that work. And we're also working to decriminalize sex work in Philadelphia. It falls under our trans justice work and our also our criminal legal reform work. So I just wonder if anyone wants to kind of talk a little bit more about like our campaign for smart justice, just to give people a little bit more background.
Sure, I'll talk about our Smart Justice campaign since that's the campaign I mostly work on. But basically, the gist of the Smart Justice campaign is to work to decarcerate Pennsylvania. There are too many people who are incarcerated right now, and a lot of people are incarcerated pre-trial, so before they've been convicted of anything. And a lot of the reasons why that is because of issues like cash bail. And people not being able to afford to even be released. So we work on cash bail, probation. A lot of people are incarcerated because they may have some form of technical violation on their probation, and it causes them to be detained. And also policing issues. But I will say this is definitely a women's rights issue because of kind of what we were talking about before, right? Like how anytime a person is incarcerated, it negatively impacts their quality of life. And that can be because of their job. Maybe they don't show up for even a few days and they lose their job. They could be caretakers, whether you're a man or a woman, a caretaker at home, and you're not able to be there to take care of your children. So you're trying to scramble and figure out that situation, et cetera, et cetera. And also like mental health issues, like being incarcerated, especially during COVID. That's, I know there are people who are just so scared, especially since when you first enter a lot of these jails, you have to be quarantined. So I'm talking 23 hours in your cell, in your cell, 1 hour where you're actually allowed to be out. And a lot of times you don't even get the 1 hour every single day. So basically we're working to decarcerate, and incarceration is horrible and horribly impacts quality of life. And yeah, and that's a women's rights issue because we are people just like everyone else. And yeah, and I'll stop talking and I'll let other people talk.
Thanks. And I do want to be mindful of our time, about 3 minutes left. So if no one else wants to add to it, I can close out unless you have something on your heart.
Tiara did so well. I have nothing to add.
So just celebrating probably the one good thing of 2020. But we did have our election, and it led to us getting a first ever woman VP who is also of Black and Indian descent, daughter of immigrants. So they just celebrate that, even though, you know, we are nonpartisan, but just having a woman VP, I think is really like a triumph. So how did that make you all feel? Maybe one word feelings.
Excited, but to hold her accountable as well. That was more than one word, but I need to say all those things.
Okay, a sentence.
I too did have mixed feelings. Like, yes, it's great as far as representation goes, but representation isn't enough. You also have to do the work. That's my sentence.
Unexpectedly happy, because I didn't know I could be happy last year. Because it was a highlight. Everything that Tiara and Muniba said, and also I just want to elevate a woman of great import, Shirley Chisholm, because without her, we would not have our current vice president. So gratitude for her legacy.
Thank you all for that, especially for lifting up the fact that our elected officials still have to be held accountable. We can celebrate, you know, the representation, but they still need to do the work, and we still need to, you know, see our systems dismantled and some new ones built, and actually see some real change happen. Thank you all so much for joining me for this conversation. I think it ended up being just so powerful, and I'm so happy to have you all and your diverse perspectives. But yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to let you go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Cam. Thanks